Okay, so have you ever had that experience where you're just like going all out, giving it your absolute best effort, but somehow it feels like you're barely making a dent?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you're pushing, 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 and yet the needle just refuses to move.
Yes. Or, you know that feeling when you're just stuck on a problem and no matter how many times you try to look at it from a different angle, you just can't seem to find a good solution.
Oh, I think everyone can relate to that sense of being totally stuck.
Totally. And if you're the kind of person who's always looking for those shortcuts, those smarter ways to learn to really make those decisions count, you probably know that feeling really well.
Absolutely. I mean, those are the moments that really make you question your approach and wonder if there's a more effective way to think and make decisions.
Right. So, in this deep dive, what we're going to do is we're going to explore some really fascinating, really practical ways to kind of sharpen your mind to make decisions that, actually get you somewhere.
Yeah, because it's not always about inherent ability, right? It's often about refining the process of thinking itself.
Absolutely. We're going to be talking about actionable frameworks, tools that you can actually start putting into practice immediately, no waiting.
The best part is these are things you can start experimenting with right away to see what works best for you.
Right. And the core idea here is that, your intelligence isn't just this fixed thing, right?
Exactly. It's not like you're born with a certain amount and that's it.
Yeah, yeah, it's more like a toolkit, right? And just like any skilled craftsperson, you can expand that toolkit.
That's a great analogy. Just like a carpenter has different tools for different jobs, we need to develop a diverse mental toolkit for different thinking challenges.
Exactly. You wouldn't use a hammer for every single task, would you?
Definitely not. You need saws, screwdrivers, chisels, all sorts of things. And it's the same with thinking different tools for different situations.
Exactly. And in this deep dive, we're going to be like master craftspeople, equipping ourselves with the best mental tools for the job.
And our goal is to sort of unveil these hidden principles, these underlying patterns in how truly effective thinkers, those people who just seem to get it, how they operate.
Right. It's about going beyond just having information. It's about knowing how to actually use it, how to apply it.
Yes. It's like having a library full of books,
Yeah.
but not knowing how to read. What's the point?
Precisely. And, it's more achievable than you might think. I mean, take Richard Feynman, for example.
Oh, the brilliant physicist. He was incredible, wasn't he?
Right. He had this knack for solving these incredibly complex math problems that, even the smartest people at MIT and Princeton, they were just stumped by.
He was in a league of his own.
Yeah. And part of his secret weapon was, believe it or not, the way he learned calculus. He basically taught himself from this, like, super advanced textbook when he was just a kid.
Wow, that's impressive. Most people would be intimidated by a book like that at that age.
I know, right? But here's the really interesting thing. Because he learned on his own, he ended up mastering this particular technique. It's called differentiating under the integral sign, and it wasn't something they usually taught in those fancy schools.
So he had this unique approach, this different tool in his mental toolbox that his peers didn't have.
Exactly. That's what gave him that edge.
Fascinating. It really shows how a unique approach, a specific mental tool, can be so powerful for tackling certain challenges.
Right. So let's dig a little deeper into this idea of having a box of tools for thinking, which brings us to our first key area, mental models. So what are these exactly?
Well, imagine mental models as different lenses through which we interpret the world.
Okay, like wearing different pairs of glasses.
Yeah, exactly. They're like frameworks or mental shortcuts that help us make sense of how things work.
And they can also help you anticipate what might happen in the future.
Exactly. Each model gives you a unique perspective, a different angle to view a problem or a situation.
And the Feynman example shows how a particular technique can act as a powerful mental model for solving specific problems.
Absolutely. Just like Feynman had that method for tackling integrals, we can all benefit from having a diverse collection of these ways of seeing the world.
So it's not just about raw brain power, right? It's about having the right tools for the job.
Exactly. It's about having a variety of lenses to choose from.
I like that. And, the real power of mental models, I think, comes into play when you have multiple ways of looking at the same problem.
Yes. The more mental models you have, the more flexible your thinking becomes. You're not limited to just one perspective.
It's like having options. So let's say you're struggling with procrastination. having different mental models, like the 2-minute rule for getting started on tasks, or the Eisenhower box for prioritizing, and even Buffett's 25 to 5 rule for figuring out what really matters.
Those are great examples. Having that variety helps you choose the right tool for the job, depending on the situation, because there isn't one best approach for everything.
Right, right. So if mental models are like tools, then having a variety of them is like having a Swiss Army knife instead of just a single screwdriver.
I love that analogy. A Swiss Army knife is so versatile, right?
Totally. But what happens if all we have is that one screwdriver? What are the potential downsides of relying on a limited set of mental models?
That's a great question. And it brings us to what's known as the law of the instrument.
Ooh, that sounds intriguing.
It's often summarized like this. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Ah, I see. So if you only have one or two mental models, you'll try to apply them to every problem, even if they aren't the best fit.
Right. It's like trying to force a square peg into a round hole. You might get it to work, but it won't be pretty.
So someone who's really good at, say, rigid project management might try to apply that same approach to a brainstorming session, and that probably wouldn't work out too well.
Exactly. A more flexible, open-ended approach would be more suitable for brainstorming. But if you're stuck in that rigid project management mindset, you might miss out on some great ideas.
And I imagine this tendency can get even stronger the more we become experts in a specific area.
Absolutely. The more comfortable we become with one particular mental model, the more likely we are to see it as the solution to most problems.
Even when it's not the best fit.
Right. And this can lead to what's called confirmation bias, where we only see information that supports our existing beliefs and ignore anything that challenges them.
So we're essentially trapped in our own little echo chambers.
In a way, yes. And this can be really dangerous because it prevents us from seeing the world clearly and making truly informed decisions.
Okay, so we need to expand our mental toolbox, but how do we actually do that? It's not like there's a class you can take called Mental Models 101.
You're right, but there are a couple of key strategies we can use. The first one is actively seeking out knowledge from a wide range of diverse and even unexpected sources.
So it's about going beyond our usual comfort zones.
Exactly. Think back to Feynman reading that advanced calculus book. That wasn't exactly typical reading material for a teenager. But because he exposed himself to something outside the norm, it gave him a unique advantage.
So we should be looking for those hidden gems, those unconventional sources of knowledge that can give us new perspectives.
Precisely. By exploring ideas and perspectives that are different from our own, we can challenge our existing assumptions and open ourselves up to new ways of thinking.
So what's the second strategy for expanding our mental toolbox?
It's about consciously connecting seemingly unrelated ideas, building a web of ideas, so to speak.
So it's not just about gathering information, it's about finding those links between things.
Exactly. Whenever you encounter a new piece of information, whether it's from a book, a podcast, or even just a casual conversation, try to think about how it connects to things you already know.
Like a mental puzzle.
Yes. We tend to categorize knowledge into separate boxes, history, science, art, and so on. But the reality is that these areas are all interconnected.
Right, right. And finding those connections can lead to some pretty amazing insights. You mentioned an example earlier about a documentary linking the design of the Great Pyramids to animal dominance rituals. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. What fascinated me about that documentary was how it connected these seemingly unrelated areas. It showed how the instinctual behavior of animals to increase their height and dominance display, to make themselves look bigger, is mirrored in the ancient Egyptian practice of building these massive structures to symbolize the pharaoh's power.
Wow. So it's linking architecture, ancient history, and animal behavior. That's pretty incredible.
Right. And by making that connection, you gain a deeper understanding of all three.
So it's about being a knowledge detective, constantly looking for those hidden connections and patterns.
Precisely. And by doing so, you're constantly building new mental models and expanding your understanding of the world.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about another fascinating framework for problem solving. The inversion technique. This sounds like it involves turning our thinking upside down.
That's a great way to put it. It's about approaching problems from the opposite direction.
So instead of focusing on how to achieve something, we focus on how to avoid its opposite.
Exactly. Instead of asking, how do I achieve X, you ask, what would cause me to fail at achieving X?
Interesting. So if my goal is to become a more effective public speaker, I would ask myself, what are the things that make someone a terrible public speaker?
Precisely. By identifying those potential pitfalls, those things that lead to failure, you can then work to avoid them and increase your chances of success.
That's pretty clever. It's like anticipating the obstacles before they even arise.
Yes, and by doing so, you often uncover hidden challenges or potential roadblocks that you wouldn't have considered otherwise.
And you mentioned an example from Josh Kaufman about learning whitewater kayaking. Can you explain how this inversion technique applies in that situation?
Yeah, Kaufman suggests ask yourself, what would it look like if absolutely everything went wrong while whitewater kayaking?
That sounds a little bit scary, to be honest.
It might seem a bit depressing at first, but it's actually incredibly useful. By imagining the worst-case scenario, you start to identify the crucial skills and safety precautions you need. You might think about things like flipping over, the kayak filling with water, hitting rocks, losing your paddle.
Okay, I see. So by focusing on the negative, you actually gain a better understanding of what you need to do to be successful and, most importantly, stay safe.
Exactly. It's a bit counterintuitive, but by focusing on what you don't want to happen, you gain valuable insights into how to make sure it doesn't.
Right, right. And you also mentioned Shane Parrish, who talks about the difference between becoming smart and avoiding stupid.
Yes. Instead of just focusing on how to do more innovative things, you can use inversion to think about all the ways you could hinder innovation.
So it's like identifying those self-sabotaging behaviors.
Precisely. By recognizing and then consciously avoiding those stupid things, you can often make significant progress toward your goals.
That makes a lot of sense. And you also mentioned Jerry Rice, the legendary football player, who used this principle of inversion to become one of the greatest wide receivers of all time.
Yes. Jerry Rice was known for running his routes with incredible precision. He focused on eliminating any mistakes in his technique rather than just trying to develop new moves.
So instead of focusing on what he could add, he focused on what he could eliminate.
Precisely. By perfecting the fundamentals and minimizing errors, he ensured he was always in the right position to make a play.
It's another example of how preventing negative outcomes can be just as effective, if not more so, than focusing solely on pursuing positive ones.
Absolutely. Sometimes it's about playing defense as much as it's about playing offense.
Great analogy. And this inversion technique seems like a great way to manage risk as well.
Definitely. When we focus on preventing negative outcomes, we're essentially reducing our exposure to potential risks.
Like taking proactive steps to prevent a fire rather than just waiting until one breaks out and then scrambling to put it out.
Exactly. For example, if you want to improve your focus, you could try using stimulants. But those come with potential downsides.
Right. So a safer approach would be to identify all the things that distract you and then eliminate those distractions.
Precisely. By focusing on prevention, you often achieve better results with less risk.
Okay, this inversion technique is definitely giving me a new way to think about problem solving. Now let's move on to a topic that I think everyone struggles with at some point. Willpower and what's known as decision fatigue. Why is it that we sometimes make choices that we know aren't the best for us, even when we intellectually understand that?
Well, for a long time, people thought it was simply a matter of willpower. If you made a bad choice, it was because you lacked willpower.
But it's not that simple, is it?
Not at all. Research now suggests that willpower is actually a finite resource, kind of like a muscle that can get tired with overuse.
Okay, so every decision we make, no matter how big or small, it actually depletes our willpower.
It seems that way. Every choice we make, even something as simple as choosing what to wear in the morning, draws on this limited pool of mental energy.
Wow, I never thought of it like that. So the more decisions we make throughout the day, the more fatigued our decision-making muscle becomes.
Exactly. And this leads to what's called decision fatigue.
So by the end of a long day, when we're mentally drained, we're more likely to make impulsive or less than ideal choices.
Precisely. Our brains are simply tired of making decisions, so we start opting for the easiest option, even if it's not the best one in the long run.
And you mentioned a fascinating study that really illustrates this concept, the one about parole board judges. Can you tell us more about that study and what it revealed about decision fatigue?
Yes. This study analyzed over 1,100 parole hearings and found something really interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears. This sounds intriguing.
At the start of the day, judges were likely to grant parole in about 65% of the cases they reviewed. But as the day went on and they made more and more decisions, the likelihood of granting parole steadily decreased.
So the same person could have a completely different outcome depending on when their hearing was scheduled.
Exactly. And here's the really crazy part. After the judges took a break for lunch, their approval rates shot back up to that initial 65%.
Wow. So it wasn't about the prisoners themselves or the crimes they committed. It was about the judge's mental state.
Exactly. It was clear evidence of decision fatigue in action. Their brains were tired from making all those decisions, so they started defaulting to the easier option, which was denying parole.
I think we can all relate to that feeling, right? Like at the end of a long day when you just don't have the mental energy to make any more decisions.
Absolutely. Have you ever noticed how after a long day, even simple things like choosing what to have for dinner can feel overwhelming?
Oh, totally. Suddenly, ordering takeout seems like the most appealing option, even though I know I have perfectly good food in the fridge.
Exactly. That's decision fatigue at work. Our brains are looking for the path of least resistance.
Okay, so we know that decision fatigue is a real thing. What are some practical strategies we can use to combat it? How do we conserve our willpower so we can make those important decisions when they matter most?
Well, the first strategy is to plan as many decisions as possible in advance. Think about your daily routine. What are the small decisions you make every day that you could decide ahead of time?
Like what to wear, what to eat for breakfast.
Exactly. If you decide those things the night before, it frees up mental energy for more important decisions later in the day.
It's like streamlining your morning routine.
Exactly. It's like putting those decisions on autopilot. The next strategy is to tackle your most important task or decision first thing in the morning.
So when our willpower is at its peak.
Precisely. Your brain is fresh and energized in the morning, so that's the best time to focus on the things that require the most mental effort.
So we should tackle those big rocks first, as they say.
Exactly. And the third strategy is to shift from making decisions to making commitments.
So instead of deciding each day whether or not to do something, we make a firm commitment in advance.
Exactly. Let's say you want to exercise regularly. Don't just wait until you feel motivated. Schedule it into your day like an important appointment.
So it becomes a non-negotiable part of your routine?
Precisely. By making that commitment ahead of time, you eliminate the need to make that decision each day, and you're less likely to succumb to those willpower lapses.
That's smart. And what's the fourth strategy for combating decision fatigue?
Remember the study about the parole board judges? They had a huge increase in granting parole after they took a break for lunch.
Right. So food plays a role in our decision making.
Absolutely. Your brain needs energy to function properly, and that energy comes from food. So make sure you're eating regularly throughout the day, especially before making any important decisions.
Okay, so don't skip meals. That's great advice. And what's the final strategy?
The final strategy is to simplify your life. Look for areas where you can eliminate unnecessary choices and streamline your routines.
So it's about decluttering our lives, both physically and mentally.
Exactly. Every decision we make, no matter how small, takes a toll on our willpower. So by reducing the number of decisions we have to make, we conserve our mental energy for the things that really matter.
It's like Marie Kondoing your life, but for decisions.
I love that. Decluttering your decisions can have a huge impact on your overall well-being and productivity.
Okay, this is giving me a lot to think about. Now, let's move on to another really interesting concept. Bright line rules. This sounds like it's all about setting clear boundaries.
It absolutely is. Think of a bright line rule as a clear, unambiguous guideline that leaves no room for interpretation or exceptions.
Okay, can you give us an example of a bright line rule?
Sure. Think of the Miranda warning that police officers give to suspects. You have the right to remain silent. Those are very specific rules, and they're designed to be followed without any wiggle room.
So it's about being very clear about what's acceptable and what's not.
Precisely. And this can be really helpful in our own lives, especially when it comes to making decisions and sticking to our goals.
So instead of saying, I need to check email less often, we might set a bright line rule, like, I will only check email between the hours of 11 a.m. and 6 p.m.
Exactly. It's much clearer and easier to follow. When we set vague goals or intentions, it's easy to let them slip. But when we have a bright line rule, it's like drawing a line in the sand. We know exactly where we stand.
And I imagine this can be really helpful for breaking bad habits as well.
Absolutely. Consider the concept of regressive extremism. If you want to become vegetarian, you might start by setting a bright line rule of no red meat. It's a clear, somewhat extreme stance, but it helps you build momentum.
So instead of gradually reducing your meat consumption, you make a clear break with red meat.
Exactly. It helps you create a new identity for yourself.
So you go from, I'm trying to eat less meat, to, I don't eat red meat.
Precisely. And this shift in identity can be really powerful in terms of making lasting changes.
And how do bright line rules relate to willpower?
Well, when you establish a bright line rule, you're essentially making the decision ahead of time.
So you don't have to constantly exert willpower in the moment.
Exactly. It frees up mental energy for other things. Plus, when you have that clear boundary, it becomes easier to resist temptation.
It's like having a built-in defense mechanism against those just this once exceptions.
Exactly. Bright line rules help you stay true to your commitments, even when things get tough.
Okay, this is giving me a lot to think about in terms of setting clearer boundaries for myself. Now, let's talk about a challenge that I think a lot of us face. Having too many ideas and not enough time to pursue them all. How do we manage that overwhelming feeling of having too much on our plates?
This is such a common struggle, especially for people who are naturally curious and ambitious. You get excited about new possibilities and want to pursue every promising lead.
And then you end up feeling totally overwhelmed and paralyzed by indecision.
Precisely. And that's why it's so important to learn how to strategically prune our ideas, just like a gardener prunes a rose bush.
Wait, pruning ideas? What does that mean?
Think of it like this. A healthy rose bush will naturally produce far more buds than it can actually support and bring to full bloom.
So not all of those buds will become beautiful roses.
Exactly. To cultivate the most vibrant roses, a gardener needs to carefully prune the bush, selectively removing some of those buds.
Okay, I see where this is going. So our ideas are like those rosebuds, and we need to prune some of them to allow the best ones to flourish.
Precisely. Just like a rose bush has limited resources, water, sunlight, nutrients, we have a limited amount of time, energy, and willpower.
And if we try to pursue every single idea, we'll end up spreading ourselves too thin.
Exactly. None of our ideas will get the attention they deserve, and we'll likely end up feeling frustrated and unfulfilled.
So how do we decide which ideas to prune?
Well, it's not always easy. It often involves making tough choices and letting go of things that still hold some appeal.
But it's necessary if we want to make real progress on the things that truly matter.
Exactly. Just like a rose bush left unpruned becomes a tangled mess, our lives can become chaotic if we don't learn to prioritize.
So it's about being selective and intentional with our time and energy.
Precisely. We need to focus on cultivating the ideas that have the greatest potential to bloom and make a real impact.
Okay, this is making me think differently about how I manage my own to-do list. Now, let's talk about a specific tool for prioritizing, the Eisenhower box. This seems to be a favorite productivity framework for a lot of people.
It's a classic. Dwight Eisenhower, who was, incredibly productive as both president and a five-star general.
Talk about having a lot on your plate.
Exactly. He developed this simple but super effective method for organizing tasks based on their urgency and importance. It's all about dividing your tasks into 4 quadrants.
Okay, walk us through those 4 quadrants.
All right, so the first quadrant is for tasks that are both urgent and important. These are the things that need to be done right away.
Like those last-minute deadlines, those unexpected crises that pop up.
Exactly. The second quadrant is for tasks that are important but not urgent. These are the things that contribute to your long-term goals but don't require immediate action.
Like planning, relationship building, working on those big long-term projects.
Precisely. These are the things you want to schedule for later.
Okay, so that's urgent and important. Important, but not urgent. What about the other 2 quadrants?
The third quadrant is for tasks that are urgent but not important. These are often distractions, interruptions, things that other people might want you to do, but that don't actually align with your goals.
Like attending every meeting request that pops up in your inbox, even if it doesn't really contribute to your work.
Exactly. Those are the things you want to delegate, if possible. And the final quadrant is for tasks that are neither urgent nor important.
So those are the time wasters, the things we should just eliminate altogether.
Exactly. Those are the things that drain our energy and prevent us from focusing on the things that truly matter.
Okay, so the Eisenhower box really forces us to think critically about how we're spending our time and energy. And you mentioned the idea of elimination before optimization. Can you explain what that means?
It's a really powerful concept that emphasizes the importance of getting rid of unnecessary tasks before trying to make the remaining ones more efficient. There's a saying in computer programming, there is no code faster than no code.
So sometimes the fastest way to do something is to not do it at all.
Exactly. We often get caught up in trying to optimize our workflows and make things more efficient, but sometimes the best solution is to just eliminate the task altogether.
It's about being ruthless with our to-do lists.
Absolutely. Before we start trying to be more efficient, we need to ask ourselves if the task is even necessary in the first place.
So we need to be honest with ourselves about what's truly important and what's just busy work.
Precisely. Being busy for the sake of being busy is not a productive use of our time.
And you mentioned the importance of having a clear understanding of our long-term goals and values when using the Eisenhower box.
Yes. When we know what we're working towards and what truly matters to us, it becomes much easier to prioritize our tasks.
So it's about aligning our actions with our values.
Exactly. The Eisenhower box can be a powerful tool for ensuring that our daily actions are moving us closer to our goals and living in accordance with our values.
Okay, this is giving me a lot to think about in terms of how I organize my own work and life. Now let's talk about a concept that seems almost too obvious. Doing more of what already works. Why do we sometimes resist this simple idea?
I think it's human nature to be drawn to novelty and innovation. We often assume that progress requires doing something new and different, even when we already have proven solutions right in front of us.
So we undervalue the power of the familiar.
Exactly. We get excited about the latest trends and technologies, but sometimes the best solutions are the ones we already know about but aren't consistently implementing.
And you mentioned a really powerful story about Michigan hospitals and their success in reducing ICU infection rates.
Yes. Back in 2004, several Michigan hospitals collaborated on a project to reduce central line infections in their ICUs. And they did it by implementing a simple checklist of basic hygiene practices.
Okay, so things like hand washing, wearing masks and gloves, using sterile equipment, that doesn't sound groundbreaking.
It doesn't. But the results were incredible. Within just 3 months, they saw a 66% reduction in infection rates.
Wow. So it wasn't about some fancy new technology or a miracle drug. It was about consistently doing the basic things that they already knew they should be doing.
Exactly. There's a huge difference between knowing something and consistently doing it. And that's where the real magic happens.
So it's not always about finding new solutions. It's about consistently implementing the ones we already have.
Precisely. Progress often hides behind boring solutions and underused insights.
Can you give us some other examples of this principle in action?
Sure. Think about flossing your teeth regularly, maintaining a consistent workout routine, following up on those important but not urgent tasks.
Or even something as simple as expressing gratitude more often or writing thank you notes.
Absolutely. These are all things we know we should be doing, but we often let them slip because they seem so basic or mundane. But the reality is that consistently doing those things can have a huge impact on our health, happiness, and success.
Okay, that's a great reminder to focus on the fundamentals and not get distracted by the shiny new objects. Now, let's talk about the power of measurement. Why is it so important to track our progress, even when it comes to things that are hard to quantify?
Imagine someone who decides to start going to the gym to get stronger, but they never track their workouts. They just do whatever exercises they feel like doing each day. They might get a good workout, but they have no way of knowing if they're actually getting stronger over time.
Right, they're just going through the motions.
Exactly. Measurement provides that feedback loop, that objective data, that allows us to see if we're actually making progress.
And you quoted Atul Gawande, who said, count something. It doesn't really matter what you count. The only requirement is that what you count should be interesting to you.
That's such a great quote. It highlights the fact that the things we measure are the things we improve.
So it's not about measuring everything. It's about choosing the things that matter most to us and tracking our progress in those areas.
Exactly. Whether it's tracking the number of push-ups you can do, the number of pages you read, or even how well you're living in alignment with your values, the act of measuring brings a level of awareness and intentionality to those areas.
So it's not just about the numbers themselves, it's about the awareness and the system that measuring creates.
Precisely. It's about paying attention to what you're doing and making adjustments as needed.
Of course, there are some things in life that are hard to measure, like love, morality, or meaning. But can we still apply the principle of measurement in those areas?
Absolutely. While you can't directly measure those abstract concepts, you can measure the behaviors that contribute to them.
So instead of trying to measure love, you might track the number of times you express appreciation to your partner.
Exactly. Or you might track the number of times you engage in acts of kindness or generosity. These are all tangible actions that reflect those underlying values.
So it's about finding those concrete, measurable actions that align with the things we value most.
Precisely. And by tracking those actions, we can get a better sense of how well we're living in accordance with our values.
Okay, let's talk about a slightly different approach to measurement. The idea of measuring backward instead of forward. What does that mean?
We often get caught up in setting goals for the future and then measuring our progress towards those goals.
So we're looking ahead and trying to predict where we'll be in the future.
Exactly. But there's another approach that can be incredibly valuable. looking back at what's already happened and using that information to guide our future actions.
Can you give us some examples of what that might look like in practice?
Sure. Imagine you're trying to lose weight. Instead of just focusing on how many pounds you want to lose in the future, you might take some time each week to review your food logs and exercise records.